I promise I'm not trying to sound pretentious right out of the gate, but Metaphor ReFantazio is one of those games that makes you think by the time the credits have rolled and the endgame achievement is in your hands. Atlus tends to push every one of its titles around one big central theme. Persona 5 focuses on attaining freedom from the limitations of modern society. 13 Sentinels brings forward concepts of AI and the core of human identity. Shin Megami Tensei 5, well, that can range between systems of oppression and whether they should be repaired or completely dismantled, or that blue-haired effeminate men can wave dash. I'll let you take your pick on that one. Metaphor brings quite a few concepts to the table, as a game called Metaphor probably should. But whereas many will focus on the irony that characters in the game consider the world we live in a fantasy escape, as we currently escape to the fantasy of their world, what struck me was the game's heavy focus on meritocracy and its overall perversion of the ideal. Meritocracy as a system is a simple concept, difficult in its implementation, and probably something you've heard of before even touching Metaphor. In a meritocracy, economic wealth, political power, or both are vested into individuals based solely on their ability and talent. Things such as social class, generational wealth, race, and religion are all meaningless when faced up against a person's abilities or deeds. Confucius himself, who advocated for one of the earliest examples of meritocracy, would probably be proud of the king's use of magic. Rather than focusing solely on fostering a new heir after the previous heir's death, he instead wishes to place the fate of the people in the hands of the one they think would best govern them. How are the people going to determine this? Well, it's going to be by the fame, deeds, and ideas of the person running for the throne. And it can theoretically be anyone.
Let him say his peace. Heed me, O kingless. Time is finite before my soul departs this benighted world. In 4 moons of life past death, there shall come a reckoning, a day of the hero. Upon that day, whosoever hath truly earned the greatest faith of the citizenry shall ascend to throne and crown by right of kings. Lofty heaven shall my unfading soul look down upon thee, and from the whispered hopes of thine anxious hearts shall those to whom thine allegiances lie be laid bare. What's happening? I hear thy voices ring out in clarion truth. Here and now witness the faces of those most desired to become king.
This notion is partially what makes it so easy for one of the best villains of modern-day gaming, Louis Guiabern, to immediately enter into the running as a frontrunner, much to the church's chagrin. He preaches the idea of meritocracy that many get behind, with a focus on one ideal: strength. But the question the game asks us throughout is, would a world like the one Luis envisions eliminate the suffering in Metaphor's world? This works out just fine for you if you're already strong, or in an established position where you can surround yourself with strong individuals. Luis does respect strength in numbers after all. He says as much when you fight him.
My name is Louis Guiabern. I am the rightful king, he who will forge anew this unworthy country into a utopia. Attack in any number, wield any weapons, but fight with your very lives. If you live by a creed, show me its strength.
But as the game goes on, we start to see how Luis's idea begins to fall apart as we push back against him and people realize that the extent of his plans may leave some of their most beloved friends and allies behind. Stroll, one of my favorite characters in the game, brings out a huge major criticism against Luis in the fight on the Tyrant Star.
Luis, you're not describing a nation that condemns evil. You're describing a nation that's entirely blind to it. A land of amoral beasts, not people. In the end, I think you're still trapped. You've been stuck in that night of flames all your life. You don't trust anyone. That's why you can only imagine a world apart from you. Unless you can face that anxiety within yourself, then you're no different from everyone you've rejected.
In the type of world that Luis strives to create, any discrimination or injustices levied against anyone can easily be hand-waved away. It's simply the strong exercising their will against the weak after all. While some may thrive in this world, it does create scenarios that do not address the core societal issues that many in Metaphor already struggle with. This goes even further and is presented to us through the Magnus brothers, Basilio and Fidelio, as they realize their roles in the kind of world Louis would strive to create, despite their initial belief in him. Both of these brothers were negatively impacted by the Igniter experiments performed on them, overall made weaker by them, be it Basilio's chronic pain or Fidelio's stunted growth. In Louis's ideal world, Basilio and Fidelio would have been the first to die, brushed aside as a natural consequence, a necessary sacrifice of Louis's world. In Louis's ideal world, one of the problems comes from the fact that only those that are able to routinely prove their worth can survive. Just one momentary slip-up is all that's needed for it to all be over for you. But does this bother Louis? Not at all. He's very much set in an ends justify the means interpretation of his ways and methods. As I was doing research for this video, I stumbled upon a user's comment who made a comparison between Louis's ideals and some stuff from the book Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Upon looking into it further, I thought this was super compelling, so let me steal this really quick. See, Hobbes presents this idea called the state of nature. It is a war against all, the ultimate meritocracy, where every being is unconstrained by the notion of morality and laws. Now, to combat this, sentient beings such as us invented government, where on some level we exchange some of our freedoms for safety and privileges. That's the core concept. Louis views the protections of the kingdom and the church as oppressive overall, spitting directly in the face of how he views life to be. Louis believes that true freedom lies in a society freed from these constraints, and that living by rules that can potentially grant things like protection and equality are overall oppressive and artificial. True protection and freedom lie in being strong. It is irrelevant that this leads to life being solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, because this is how it should be in Louis's mind. Our protagonist, Will, however, adopts an entirely different stance on addressing the failings of the kingdom. With the advent of archetypes and Will's own strong willpower, we start to fall into a duty of the strong to protect the weak narrative. And yes, while that is also a Demon Slayer reference, you can also pull the concept from Romans 15:1 and 15:2 in the Bible. From the New International Version's quote, "We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Each of us should please our neighbors for their good, to build them up." This ideal, this methodology, becomes a means to an end to bring out Will's ideal world. His interpretation of and desire for the utopia within his book exists in direct opposition to Louis's brutal Darwinist meritocracy. All are equal, all live in safety, and the rich and the poor are as one, with no gaps and no conflict. All are friends who deserve our help, directly from the book. Whereas Louis, due to his traumatic past, can never see a world where people would come together to help each other, where the strong would feel an obligation to protect the weak and not just trample on them. Will sees and pushes for a world where that is possible. And while Louis is insanely strong and struggles mightily alone, it is ultimately Will's strength of will that triumphs over his. And after all is said and done, everything is as Louis desired it. The strong triumphed over the weak. Louis could just never envision a world where he, despite all he did, was weak. And that core ideal, the idea of someone exhibiting such immense strength to ultimately reject a world that they could and would thrive in, utterly fascinates me. Will ultimately could have lived in Louis's world, but could not accept it because nobody else he cared about could. Let me know your thoughts about Metaphor as a whole down in the comment section below. So much of the game was honestly great, from character design to combat to the music, but it was this aspect of the game that not only made Louis as a villain so compelling, but his struggle all the more compelling. Louis is never once a hypocrite in my eyes throughout the entire game. He is always struggling to the bitter end. Being able to oppose a villain like that is refreshing, seeing as there's so many games out there where villains are ultimately willing to abandon their ideals to save themselves in one final moment of weakness. I think we're going to be thinking out and breaking apart so many aspects of this game, and hopefully in the future, its sequels for years to come. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, sharing this with your friends, whatever. I'm really enjoying making these kinds of videos now. I thought Metaphor was just utterly fascinating, and I've got plenty more videos about plenty more games. Not all of them will be as serious as this, but I felt like talking about this related to Metaphor, a game that was so good, was absolutely worth it. As you head down to the comment section, be sure to check out the Discord, Patreon, and Ko-fi. Huge thanks to everyone on all those platforms for their support, and to you for watching the video until the very end. This is Kawaii 50, hoping you all have a phenomenal day, and I'll see you all in the next one.